You're seeing this right now because something inside you has already shifted. That feeling of being at rock bottom, that sense that everything is falling apart. Jung discovered it's not a breakdown. It's the first sign that you're about to experience the biggest comeback of your entire life. Jung spent decades studying people who hit absolute bottom, and what he found changes everything we think we know about suffering. The people who see too much, who feel too deeply, who've been crushed by betrayal, they aren't broken. They're on the edge of a transformation so powerful, it terrifies everyone around them. Your pain isn't destroying you. It's preparing you for something extraordinary. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The rock bottom you're experiencing right now isn't random bad luck. It's happening because of your own gifts. You see things other people miss. You notice the tiny facial expressions that reveal lies. You sense emotional undercurrents in every room. You feel the tensions everyone else ignores. This ability makes you powerful, but it also makes you a target. Society can't handle people who see through its masks. Your greatest strength became your greatest burden, because seeing everything clearly separates you from the collective illusion most people live inside. Think about it. How many times have you noticed something was wrong, spoke up about it, and got attacked for being negative? How often have you sensed someone's hidden pain or deception, only to be called too sensitive when you mentioned it? Your perceptions were accurate, but people blamed you for reflecting truths they didn't want to face. Jung called this the problem of superior perception. You became a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. Every time you reflected what you saw, people had two choices. They could integrate the truth about themselves, or they could attack the mirror. Most people chose to attack you. Your perception works like a high-definition camera in a world where everyone else sees through foggy glass. You pick up micro-expressions that last a fraction of a second. You notice when someone's words don't match their body language. You feel the energy shift in a room before anyone speaks. You sense deception, hidden agendas, and unspoken resentments that others completely miss. This isn't paranoia or imagination. Research shows that highly perceptive people process emotional information faster and more accurately than others. Your brain is literally wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. You're not making things up. You're seeing what's actually there. But here's where it gets painful. When you try to voice what you see, people don't thank you for the insight. They attack you for creating problems. You point out that someone seems troubled, and they explode at you for being negative. You express concern about obvious red flags, and you're accused of being judgmental or manufacturing drama where none exists. This creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. You become the designated problem in every group you enter, not because you cause issues, but because you reveal issues that already exist in the collective unconscious. The group unconsciously agrees to ignore certain truths to maintain harmony. Your presence disrupts those agreements simply by existing authentically. You become the repository for everything the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. The family projects all its dysfunction onto you. The workplace makes you responsible for tensions everyone contributes to. Your friend group blames you for noticing the conflicts they create. You end up isolated, exhausted, questioning your own sanity, not because you were wrong, but because you were right. This is why you ended up at rock bottom. Your gift of seeing clearly made you a target for shadow projection. People unconsciously attacked you for reflecting what they refused to acknowledge in themselves. And because you're empathetic, you absorbed their attacks. You started doubting your perceptions. You apologized for seeing what you saw. You tried to make yourself smaller, quieter, less aware. But here's what Jung discovered that will change your life. This breaking point you're experiencing right now is actually the catalyst for your comeback. The moment when your gift stops being your curse and becomes your superpower. Let me show you what's really happening inside your mind right now. While everyone thought you were just suffering, you were actually doing something brilliant. Your brain has been cataloging everything. Every person who hurt you, every betrayal, every manipulation. You know their triggers, their insecurities, their deepest fears. You've mapped their emotional patterns with surgical precision. You never used this knowledge. You stayed quiet, you absorbed the pain, you blamed yourself, but your mind was studying the entire time. Jung found this pattern in case after case. Highly perceptive people don't just endure abuse, they systematize it. Your mind isn't a victim's diary, it's a strategist's war room, waiting for activation. The comeback starts with one specific moment Jung identified across all his cases. He called it the clarity event. This is when your pattern recognition finally overwhelms your need to believe the best in people. Usually, it's triggered by betrayal from someone you completely trusted and protected. You discover infidelity, financial deception, or emotional manipulation from your closest person. What makes it devastating isn't the act itself. It's the realization that you saw the signs all along and ignored them. You gave them chance after chance. You made excuses for their behavior. You blamed yourself for noticing inconsistencies. And they took advantage of your empathy every single time. Most people expect you to fall apart when this happens. Your betrayers certainly expect emotional chaos. They're prepared to gaslight you, to make you question your perceptions, to paint you as unstable or irrational. They expect crying, screaming, the familiar pattern of you absorbing pain and eventually forgiving them. But something different happens instead, something that terrifies everyone involved. You become unnaturally calm. The emotional fog that clouded your judgment for years suddenly lifts. You stop second-guessing what you observed. You stop making excuses for behavior that never deserved excusing. For the first time in your life, you trust your perceptions completely. Jung described this moment as feeling like waking up from a dream. Suddenly, everything makes sense. All the pieces you noticed but dismissed snap into perfect clarity. You see the entire pattern laid out before you. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment they exploited your kindness. And you see it all without emotion clouding the picture. This is what Jung meant by shadow integration under extreme duress. Your suppressed intelligence, your denied strength, your silenced intuition, all the parts of yourself you were taught to hide because they made others uncomfortable, they all come roaring back online at once. Not as rage or chaos, but as crystalline clarity. Your brain shifts from emotional processing to analytical processing. You stop feeling the pain and start seeing the patterns. You become able to articulate manipulation tactics with clinical precision. You can explain gaslighting techniques, projection mechanisms, emotional exploitation strategies, not because you studied psychology, but because you've been cataloging these behaviors unconsciously for years. This isn't revenge. This is clarity. You finally use your gift of complete perception not to excuse behavior, but to expose it with surgical accuracy. Jung watched this transformation happen again and again. The kindest people, the most empathetic souls, suddenly speaking truth with surgical accuracy. Not attacking, not raging, just revealing everything they observed, catalogued, and silently endured. Like surgeons identifying each diseased part before removing it. This is your comeback beginning. The moment you stop denying your own perceptions and start wielding them consciously. But the transformation doesn't stop there. Jung discovered that this clarity event triggers what he called shadow integration. Your shadow isn't evil. It's your suppressed intelligence, your silenced intuition, your denied strength. All the parts of yourself you were taught to hide because they made others uncomfortable. The first phase of integration is what Jung called recognition and differentiation. You need to establish psychological boundaries. For years, you've been absorbing everyone else's emotions, confusing their feelings with your own. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where you merge with collective unconscious contents and lose track of your authentic self. You walk into a room and immediately feel anxious, but the anxiety isn't yours. It belongs to someone else in that space. You have a conversation with your mother and end up feeling guilty, but you can't identify what you actually did wrong. The guilt was projected onto you. You leave a meeting feeling exhausted and depressed, but those emotions were the collective atmosphere you absorbed, not your genuine state. The integration process requires learning to distinguish between your authentic feelings and the unconscious contents you pick up from others. This demands what Jung called conscious discrimination. You need to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed emotional material to settle so you can recognize your own authentic psychological voice beneath the noise. Solitude becomes your laboratory. In silence and aloneness, without anyone else's emotional field influencing you, you start to hear what you actually think, feel, and want. You discover that many of the beliefs you thought were yours were actually downloaded from family, culture, or relationships. You find your real preferences buried under layers of accommodation and people-pleasing. This phase takes time. You can't rush the process of learning to hear yourself clearly. But as you practice daily solitude and conscious discrimination, you develop an internal compass that guides you. You start knowing immediately when something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why. You trust that knowing instead of dismissing it. The second phase proves more intense. This is where you integrate your shadow by acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. The more you deny your own capacity for manipulation, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you become when seeing these qualities in others. Here's the truth that sets you free. You possess the capacity for every behavior you witness. You could manipulate if you chose to. You could deceive if you wanted to. You could exploit others' weaknesses if you decided to. Acknowledging this doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. When you accept that you contain the full spectrum of human nature, something magical happens. You stop being shocked and hurt by others' behavior. You stop taking their dysfunction personally. You see manipulation and think, yes, humans do that, instead of feeling betrayed that this particular human did it to you. This is how the victim's diary becomes the strategist's war room. You're no longer cataloging abuse to prove how much you've suffered. You're studying human nature to understand how psychology actually works. You become fascinated rather than traumatized, curious instead of wounded. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. You understand manipulation because you recognize your own capacity for it. You see through deception because you acknowledge you could deceive if you chose to. When you integrate your shadow, you don't become cruel. You become complete. You combine your sensitivity with strategic thinking, your empathy with boundaries, your kindness with strength. You become what Jung called psychologically whole. The people around you sense this change immediately. They can't explain why, but suddenly they feel nervous around you. You're not aggressive or hostile, but everyone knows something fundamental has shifted. Manipulative people, especially, can feel it in their bones. Their usual tactics won't work anymore. Here's why this matters for your comeback. Once you integrate your shadow, you become immune to the games that destroyed you before. You can't be gaslighted because you trust your perceptions absolutely. You can't be manipulated because you see emotional tactics before they're fully formed. You can't be broken because you've already been to the bottom and emerged stronger. But Jung warned about pitfalls that can derail your transformation. The first trap is what he called inflation. This is when you identify with your superior perception and fall into the prophet complex. You start believing you must save everyone, that you're uniquely qualified to fix all unconsciousness around you. This happens subtly. You've just discovered the power of seeing clearly. You've integrated your shadow and suddenly understand human psychology at a deep level. You look around and see everyone else still trapped in the patterns you escaped, and you feel compelled to wake them up, to save them from their own unconsciousness. The problem is that you've identified your small ego with transpersonal energy. You start believing that your insights make you special, chosen, enlightened. You develop certainty about your perceptions and lose humility before mystery. You begin judging others for being less conscious, instead of recognizing that consciousness develops at its own pace. This leads to preaching, unwanted advice giving, and eventual isolation. People sense your judgment disguised as concern. They feel your superiority masked as helpfulness, and they reject you, not because your insights are wrong, but because you're wielding them as weapons instead of offerings. The solution is remembering that your perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to wield. You don't need to save anyone. You need to become sovereign in your own life first. Let your transformation speak for itself. People will ask when they're ready to hear. The second trap is withdrawal justification. Using your superior perception to justify complete retreat from society, convincing yourself that others are too unconscious to engage with. You look around and see manipulation, projection, unconsciousness everywhere, and you decide that the solution is complete withdrawal into isolation. But true transformation requires engagement. The hermit who withdraws hasn't transcended life. They've been defeated by it. Jung emphasized that individuation doesn't mean separation from the world. It means engaging with the world more consciously, from a place of integrated wholeness rather than fragmented reactivity. Yes, you need solitude to maintain your psychological boundaries. Yes, you need to be selective about who gets access to your energy. But withdrawal as a permanent solution is just another form of the victim pattern. It's saying that the world is too much for you, that you can't handle staying engaged while maintaining your integrity. The integrated person learns to move through the world consciously. They engage with unconscious people without becoming unconscious themselves. They maintain their boundaries while remaining open to connection. They serve consciousness evolution through presence, not through absence. The third trap is the most dangerous. It's having absolute conviction combined with complete unconsciousness of your own shadow. This is the person who projects their darkness onto everyone else, while believing themselves to be the pure victim. They see manipulation everywhere, except in themselves. They identify others as narcissists, abusers, and predators, while acting out those same patterns unconsciously. They're convinced of their own righteousness, certain about everyone else's evil, and completely blind to their own capacity for the very behaviors they condemn. This person hasn't integrated their shadow. They've simply reversed the projection. Instead of absorbing others' shadows, they're now projecting their own shadow onto everyone around them. They haven't transformed. They've just swapped one unconscious pattern for another. The warning signs are clear. They never doubt their own motivations. They interpret any questioning as attack or betrayal. They're constantly in conflict with others while maintaining they're always the innocent party. They recruit people to their narrative about how terrible everyone else is. They show extraordinary conviction but zero self-reflection. This isn't a comeback. It's self-destruction and destruction of others. The person operating from this place becomes dangerous, not because they're consciously malicious, but because they're unconsciously possessed by the very forces they claim to oppose. The way through is brutal honesty about your own capacity for every quality you see in others. Acknowledging that you contain the full spectrum of human nature allows you to see clearly without judgment. It keeps you humble. It prevents the inflation that leads to playing God with others' psychological development. Your comeback depends on avoiding these traps. The goal isn't to become less perceptive, it's to become consciously perceptive, to wield your abilities with wisdom instead of wielding them unconsciously or not at all. Once you successfully integrate your shadow and avoid the transformation pitfalls, you become what Jung called a balanced warrior. You're still deeply caring, but strategically protective of where that care flows. You can be incredibly gentle with those who deserve it and ruthlessly precise with those who don't. You develop what Jung called selective empathy. You don't lose your sensitivity. You just stop wasting it on people who exploit it. You can read others perfectly, but you're no longer compelled to fix, save, or tolerate them. This is love with boundaries, compassion with discernment. Think about how this shows up practically. You meet someone new, and within minutes, your perception gives you a complete read on their psychological patterns. You see their wounds, their defenses, their manipulations, their genuine qualities. But instead of automatically trying to help them heal or giving them endless chances, you simply decide whether they're someone you want in your life. If they show genuine self-awareness and capacity for growth, you engage. If they're defensive, projection-prone, and unconscious, you politely decline further connection. No drama, no explanations, no second-guessing. You trust what you see and act accordingly. The transformation shows up in every area of your life. You leave toxic relationships with strategic precision instead of emotional drama. You cut contact with manipulative family members without guilt or second-guessing. You rebuild your life exactly as you want it, immune to others' opinions about your choices. People who once walked all over you now avoid you instinctively, not because you're aggressive, but because predators can sense when their tactics won't work. Meanwhile, authentic people feel safer around you than ever before. Your presence becomes a filter that reveals people's true nature. But you can't maintain this transformation alone. Jung emphasized the crucial importance of finding what he called the few who understand. Other individuated persons who recognize authenticity, people engaged in their own transformation process who can handle your perception without defensiveness, natural containers who possess the maturity to hold psychological content without being overwhelmed. These people are rare, but they're essential for your psychological survival. With fellow individuated persons, you can be completely authentic without fear of overwhelming or threatening them. There's a quality of presence, a recognition that happens immediately. You see each other as members of what Jung called the conscious minority. You also need those actively engaged in individuation. People in therapy, doing inner work, pursuing spiritual practice. They may not possess your level of perception, but they understand its value. They've begun to know themselves, which means they can bear to be known by others. And you need natural containers, mature individuals who've weathered significant life challenges and developed the ability to hold psychological content without being overwhelmed by it. These might be elders, mentors, or peers who demonstrate unusual emotional stability and wisdom. You identify these people carefully. They ask genuine questions about your observations rather than defending against them. They acknowledge their own contradictions without shame. They maintain emotional stability when confronted with uncomfortable truths. They show real curiosity about consciousness and growth. With these few, you can be completely authentic. You reveal your perceptions gradually, testing their capacity to engage without becoming defensive. You frame insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. You always give people the option to explore deeper or stay surface level. You build relationships based on mutual recognition rather than need or obligation. But your comeback serves a purpose beyond just your personal transformation. Jung believed that highly perceptive individuals who successfully integrate their abilities serve a vital function for human consciousness evolution. You're not just healing yourself, you're preparing humanity for necessary developmental steps. Think about it. You feel collective problems first and most intensely. Your personal symptoms often reflect what the entire culture needs to address. You sense environmental and social issues before they become obvious. You perceive spiritual possibilities beyond current frameworks. You detect psychological patterns that explain collective behavior. Jung called people like you consciousness pioneers. Your psychological development precedes collective readiness. You're an advanced scout for territories that humanity will eventually need to explore. What appears in you first as insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. You serve as a laboratory for consciousness, experiments that will eventually benefit the whole. Your integrated perception becomes what Jung called cultural medicine, not because you're preaching or teaching, but simply because you're embodying more conscious ways of being. People watch how you set boundaries, how you respond to manipulation, how you maintain authenticity under pressure, and they learn without you having to explain anything. This is why your comeback matters so much. You're not just becoming successful for yourself. You're modeling a new way of being that others will eventually follow. Let me show you what Jung considered the ultimate proof that your comeback is real. He studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. Two cases stood out as perfect contrasts. First, consider Nietzsche. Jung was deeply influenced by his philosophy, but disturbed by his trajectory. Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature. He could see through social, religious, and philosophical masks with devastating clarity. His writing revealed psychological truths that most people couldn't bear to confront. He saw how people used morality as a weapon to control others. He exposed how religion functioned as a mechanism for the weak to dominate the strong through guilt. He understood that most human behavior was driven by unconscious forces people refused to acknowledge. His perception was accurate, brilliant, and revolutionary. But Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights constructively. Instead of using his perception in service of healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. He became increasingly isolated, bitter, and contemptuous of ordinary human beings. He identified completely with his superior function, rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. Jung watched this pattern destroy Nietzsche from the inside out. His perception became a burden too heavy to carry. He couldn't find others who understood him. He couldn't translate his insights into wisdom that could nourish people where they actually were. He demanded that humanity rise to his level immediately, instead of meeting people in their process. The result was devastating isolation, followed by complete psychological collapse. At age 44, Nietzsche had a breakdown from which he never recovered. He spent the last 11 years of his life in psychiatric care, unable to write, barely able to function. Jung saw this as the inevitable outcome when superior perception remains unintegrated. The individual becomes consumed by what they see rather than transformed by it. Now contrast that with Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic Jung studied extensively. Eckhart possessed what Jung called mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities that others couldn't access. He saw into the nature of consciousness itself. He understood the relationship between ego and divine with startling clarity. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service. He became a spiritual teacher who could communicate profound truths in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. He met people where they were and gently guided them toward deeper awareness. Jung noted that Eckhart's success came from what he called conscious humility. Eckhart never lost sight of the fact that his perceptions were a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. He spoke in parables and paradoxes that allowed people to discover truth at their own pace. He transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. Eckhart, lived into his 70s, surrounded by students, contributing to consciousness evolution until his final days. He demonstrated what Jung believed was possible when perception is integrated consciously. Not breakdown, but breakthrough. Not isolation, but conscious service. Not collapse under the burden, but transformation of the burden into a gift. The difference between these two reveals the choice you face right now. Will your perception become a weapon that isolates you, or wisdom that serves consciousness evolution? Will you collapse under the burden like Nietzsche, or transform it into integrated strength like Eckhart? Jung himself faced this exact choice. From 1913 to 1919, he underwent what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. His superior perception of unconscious contents, both his own and others, nearly destroyed him. He documented in his Red Book feeling menaced by psychosis, overwhelmed by visions and insights that threatened to consume his rational mind. What saved him was his ability to understand what was happening through his work with patients. He recognized that his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological, but evolutionary. They represented consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. This realization transformed his relationship to his gifts entirely. Instead of being terrorized by what he saw, he began studying it systematically. He developed methods for working with unconscious contents consciously. He learned to distinguish between personal psychology and archetypal forces. He became a bridge between conscious and unconscious realms. This breakthrough informed everything Jung taught his patients about integration. He knew from personal experience that the journey from dangerous perception to integrated wisdom was possible because he had walked that path himself. His own transformation became the template for helping others navigate their psychological breakthroughs. Your comeback hinges on this same choice. The moment your gift stops being your burden and becomes a force for conscious transformation, not just for yourself, but for everyone whose life you touch. Here's what Jung discovered that makes your comeback inevitable. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced evolutionary feature. You weren't born to suffer in silence. You were born to serve consciousness evolution. The danger was never that you see too much. The danger was that you might fail to integrate what you see consciously, that you might use your gifts to retreat from the world rather than engage with it more skillfully, that you might become the victim of your own abilities instead of their master. But you're reading this right now because something inside you already knows the truth. Your rock bottom wasn't an ending. It was the necessary prerequisite for your transformation. The betrayal that broke you open was the catalyst that forced you to stop denying your perceptions and start trusting them completely. Jung's patient who experienced this transformation said something that captures the essence of your comeback. She learned not to see less, but to see more wisely. Not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This is your path forward, learning to wield your perception consciously, combining your sensitivity with strategy, your empathy with boundaries, your kindness with strength, becoming not less of who you are, but more completely yourself. The world told you that seeing too much was your weakness. Jung proved it's your superpower. Society taught you to doubt your perceptions. Your comeback is learning to trust them absolutely. People punished you for reflecting their shadows. Your transformation is learning to reflect truth without needing their acceptance. You're not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires. Your sensitivity isn't your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your sensitivity was your burden. Now you're learning to be consciously sensitive. And consciousness, Jung discovered, is what transforms victims into forces of nature. Your comeback isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming fully who you always were beneath the conditioning. That person who sees everything, feels deeply, and knows truth when they encounter it. Except now you trust yourself completely. You set boundaries fiercely. You choose consciously where your gifts go. The biggest comeback of your life isn't coming. It's already here. It started the moment you hit rock bottom and something inside you refused to stay down. That refusal was your shadow integrating, your suppressed strength finally emerging, your denied intelligence demanding recognition. Jung spent his life studying people like you. He called your transformation beautiful and terrible. Beautiful because you become exactly what humanity needs. Terrible because you become what every manipulator fears. Someone who can see through them completely, but no longer needs anything from them. If you recognize yourself in this transformation, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your story might be the catalyst for their comeback. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological development that transcends ordinary limitations. Ready to explore how integrated perception creates unshakable psychological power? Check out my video on the danger of seeing what others don't, where Jung reveals why this ability either destroys you or transforms you into something extraordinary. Your comeback isn't about revenge. It's about sovereignty. Not about becoming hard, but about becoming whole. Not about losing your gifts, but about finally learning to use them consciously. You were born to see everything. Now you're learning to see with wisdom, and that makes you unstoppable. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.